First, though, let's take a look at the news that another East Midlands company has gone into administration. Leader Flush Shapland, a door manufacturer with factories in Langley Mill and Mansfield. As a result, 400 people have lost their jobs. Alberto, we seem to be hearing more and more of this, sadly, don't we? At the end of last year, S&A Foods in Derby went into administration, and Leicester insulation and renewable energy firm, the Mark Group, collapsed with another 600 jobs going.
It's clearly very regrettable, any company where they close down and people lose their jobs. But I think we do need to put this into context, Mary. If you compare the situation from, say, April 2010 to the current situation, unemployment has decreased and employment has increased. In my own constituency of South Leicestershire, it's got one of the smallest unemployment rates in the country. So I think we need to take the picture in context. But what I can say is, whilst it's not the role for government to create jobs, it is the role of government to create the right environment for business people, entrepreneurs and others to invest in creating jobs. And we've got the good news, of course, in Leicester, where IBM is investing in that city near my constituency and where it's expected 300 plus jobs will be created. Okay. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are jobs out there. Well,
Alberto's painting a different picture of this, obviously, but Alan, one of these factories is in Mansfield. What's been the County Council's reaction to the losses there?
Well, the County Council does everything we can to support businesses and to try and keep businesses viable. We've allocated a £3 million economic development capital fund to support businesses. We've been able to secure and make safe 350 jobs so far in our administration by doing that. We're also, of course, managing the European Community Leader Fund, another £3 million worth of funding for predominantly rural businesses. So we're trying as much as we can to support businesses. But, you know, none of this has been helped in Nottinghamshire by the closure of Thoresby, the colliery. That was one of the last in the country to close, certainly the last in the county. Yes. And businesses that supply and support that colliery, of course, will feel that as well. So it makes life very difficult locally for our business community.
Okay. Well, now, you might have been rather too busy celebrating Christmas to notice, but the government has opened up large parts of the East Midlands to fracking. The Department for Energy and Climate Change has granted exploration licences for oil and gas across the region and covering large parts of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, as well as parts of Leicestershire too. But how do the communities facing fracking feel? Our political editor Tony Rowe has been finding out.
A licence to frack? Well, no, not yet. It's a licence to explore to see if there is enough energy locked underground to be worth breaking out. It's taken some time to wake up to the potential of shale oil and gas. One cabinet minister wrote in his diary that he was told shale was the solution to the world's oil problem. That was January the 11th, 1977, and the politician was Tony Benn. The problem for opponents is to free the shale gas, you need to fracture the rock below ground.
Well, this is a map of Sherwood Forest. So we've got Ollerton here, Mansfield, Worksop, Retford. This whole area here is where there could be shale gas, and these are licence blocks.
And that was announced on the last day of Parliament?
The last day of Parliament was when they slipped through the announcement.
Fracking will of course take place underground, but those who object say the landscape near them will be blighted. It will, they say, become industrialised. In Ollerton, there is both acceptance and reluctance at the idea.
In view of the fact that Ollerton is already the earthquake capital of the UK, I think that introducing fracking without the, I suppose, full information available, that I would consider it to be detrimental to the area.
As a whole, I think it's a good idea, fracking, to be fair. But obviously, take what you can out of what's left, sort of thing, and there's a way forward, isn't it? As long as there's jobs for people, mate, there's happy days, isn't it?
I think anything that's going to present opportunity for employment is positive.
I think it's a bad idea.
Understandably, people who don't have an idea of exactly how we go about our business
have legitimate concerns, and it's part of our job to communicate to those people how we can conduct these operations in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. And I would point to the fact that we have been drilling and producing oil and gas fields onshore in the UK for well over 50 years, safely and environmentally responsibly.
Campaigners will continue to voice their opposition.
Nottinghamshire County Council seems to be really oblivious to the scale of operation that we could see across the whole of the Sherwood Forest area and large parts of Nottinghamshire. We've had small-scale oil companies in the past that are still going, little nodding donkeys in a field somewhere, and they seem to think that fracking is going to be something similar. Whereas in reality, if it's the sort of scale the government wants to see, then we're going to see thousands of wellheads across the country, and that means hundreds of wellheads in Nottinghamshire.
But the political will at the moment is to give fracking a chance to become an important part of meeting our energy needs.
Well, we're joined now by Kat Bürtke, the Green Party's regional coordinator for the East Midlands. And Kat, some of the people that we saw there in Tony's film in Ollerton welcomed the idea of fracking. I think one, in fact, said happy days, bringing money and jobs.
I think this is mistaken. We know renewables produce far more jobs than fracking or any of the fossil fuel industry or sector. That's a fact. Also, the environmental risks are enormous. We know it increases the risk of earthquakes. It uses huge amount of water, of which 50% is lost, the other 50% is contaminated with dangerous chemicals. Health effects on people who live locally can be quite damaging. I don't think people are fully aware. However, having said that, we know that campaign groups, a lot of residents are starting to get quite active because a lot of residents do share these environmental concerns.
And iGas, the shale gas company that we saw represented in our film, says it is a very heavily regulated industry, though, with strict planning and environmental checks. So, you know, you talk about huge concerns, but they say they're strictly controlled.
Well, okay, let's play it. I mean, I disagree, and we have seen in Blackpool they've had earthquakes, for example. House prices have fallen consequently. But let's imagine there would be nothing going wrong. Fact is, we're going to run out of fossil fuels sooner or later anyway. So we're going to have to start a transition to renewables. And secondly, we are facing climate change. That's a fact. We've just seen December, the flooding, one after the other extreme weather condition.
So these are your main concerns there about the climate. So Alan Rhodes, as the leader of Nottinghamshire County Council, people are going to be knocking on your door, aren't they, with these licence applications. What's the latest situation and how many are knocking on that door?
Well, I mean, there are concerns about fracking. I think what people need is clear and concise information about fracking, about the benefits and about any disadvantages and dangers that fracking
do you share
brings.
any of Kat's concerns?
Oh, I share some concerns. I feel as if I'm not well enough informed about fracking, shale gas extraction. I hear a lot of scare stories and a lot of things about.
But you've got to make the decisions on whether these things should go ahead. So how will you do that if you're not properly informed?
That's the important point. But of course, every application will be judged on its own merits, and we do have expertise in house who will be able to guide us and inform us.
Are you generally in favour?
The only applications so far are for the very far north of the county in Mizzen. There have been, contrary to reports and stories, there have been no applications to frack or drill in any part of Sherwood Forest or around the Sherwood Forest area.
So no licences have come to you for that area?
Not for that area, no.
Okay. Are you generally in favour of fracking? As the leader of
I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded about it. I'm never closed. I never close my mind to anything. And besides which, because there are applications coming to the county council, I don't personally want to state my position on fracking because I wouldn't want to compromise them. So I am open-minded about it.
Kat?
I was just going to say there have been licences being given out, but I think you're referring to the planning applications that have been submitted. There's a difference between licences and planning applications, and I believe there are 12 licences.
Licences is the very first part of the whole step, isn't it? And then planning permission's got to come later.
Yes.
Alberto Costa, it's interesting, isn't it? This came out before Christmas, and the last sort of announcement on fracking was way back in August. Were you trying to sneak this under the wire just before Christmas and hope that nobody would notice it? It's such a big issue.
No, not at all. And I take a completely different view from the Green Party. I think this is a great opportunity for the East Midlands and indeed our country. Now, Kat and her party cannot have it both ways. She can't say we're running out of fossil fuels, therefore we need to look at something else. It's precisely because we need a diversified energy portfolio that I would encourage Alan and the Labour Party to go down the route of looking at that diversified energy portfolio, which includes fracking. The decision that I took as an MP, along with other decisions, was to pass legislation which makes it very tight indeed for the oil and gas industry when it comes to exploration of shale gas. There are very tight health and safety regulations that must be met. And the second thing that I must emphasise, Mary, is that the Green Party representative here has just said that we know of the dangers allegedly. We don't know. These are not peer-reviewed papers. She talks about Blackpool and earthquakes. Where exactly is this evidence?
For these fears?
There is a lot of evidence. And I mean, for example, we know that fracking, using the methane, has got a higher greenhouse gas emission than burning conventional coal. And we are facing climate change.
Government. Where's these earthquakes?
Well, it has happened in Lancashire and it's been proven to be linked to fracking. House prices have consequently fallen. It has. Absolute fact. And you need to also, your government has been subsidising.
This as absolute fact?
Well, there is. I've got to tell you. Your government has been subsidising the fossil fuel industry
on a
and
fact
has stopped fossil fuel subsidised. We cannot move on like this. This is the future of our children. We are facing climate change. We need to have a transition to clean energy, and that means renewables, not fracking.
When we heard Nigel Lee, the protester in our film, he said that your council, Nottinghamshire County Council, Alan, is being rather naive here. He thinks that you think it's just going to be a couple of nodding donkeys, where in fact he thinks it could be hundreds of drilling rigs.
Well, I don't know why he thinks that. I mean, we are very aware that Nottinghamshire has potentially quite a lot of sites for fracking. I've never said publicly, and I don't believe personally, that it's going to be a couple of nodding donkeys if it takes off. So we are preparing ourselves for any number of applications coming in. We will, as I've said earlier, look at them on their merits. We won't, we can't say that we're anti-fracking, and we won't grant fracking applications. It wouldn't be right. I have to say this though, Mary. I think the government were wrong in relaxing conditions to allow fracking to take place in country parks. I think that was the wrong move for the government to make, and a very unpopular thing to do.
Well, the decision that we took in Westminster was based on real fact. The fact is this, that we've got some of the most stringent regulations across the whole world in terms of health and safety regulations.
Kat Burger, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for coming into the studio and joining us today. Now, there are fears that bus routes in rural areas across the East Midlands could close as cuts in council spending bite. Campaigners are warning it will hit elderly people living in those communities in particular. Well, Des Coleman's been to see one service that's under threat and meet the people who rely on it to get around.
It's more than just a trip to the shops. For Celia Johnson, it's a vital lifeline. Celia uses Derbyshire's Dialer bus service to get from her home in Swanwick to a local supermarket.
Without it, we'd be stuck in the house. Not many of us can actually get out at all. Nearest buses are too far to walk. So that's it. We'd be sat watching television and doing nothing.
It's a personalised service. There's even help getting into and out of the shops and with the shopping too. But the Dialer bus service is under threat, and the charity which runs it says a volunteer driver scheme to help people get to hospital appointments could also go.
From the 1st of July, the funding for Dialer Bus and the community car scheme ceases, and these people are going to be housebound. They don't know where they're going to turn. Well, I'll tell you where they are going to turn. That's be social services, and they've already got an overstretched budget. We've already proven to the council that you fund £1 million a year to community transport. If that goes, then your social service budget is going to increase by £1.25 million.
Derbyshire County Council says it has to find savings of almost £160 million in the next 5 years. And all of its budgets are under pressure. It says it's trying to do what it can to pay for services that local people use.
Quite frankly, I don't care where the money comes from, whether it comes from Derbyshire County Council or whether it comes from Westminster. If we get the money, we can provide the services for these vulnerable people.
So what does it actually mean to you to keep this?
I think it keeps me fit actually, because without it, I would go downhill. If I'm stuck in the house, you get very down. You need it. You need to get out.
But as austerity measures bite, transport services across the East Midlands are under pressure, and a trip to the shops for many elderly and vulnerable people could become another victim of the cuts.
Well, we're joined now by Claire Walters, the Chief Executive of Bus Users UK, a national group which campaigns for better bus services. Claire, thanks for joining us. We heard there in our film about services in Derbyshire, but what about the rest of the East Midlands? What's that looking like as far as cuts to bus services are concerned?
Well, Derbyshire in particular is facing a large number of cuts. It got slashed last year. There's another £1.5 million going off this year, including another, on top of that, 860,000 off community transport, which is the funding that's going to pay for the dialer bus service. It's so important. Across the whole area, there's another couple of million that have already gone from Nottinghamshire, and quite a lot more in Leicestershire.
Okay, and we're hearing the impact that's having. Alan Rhodes, when you see how much people rely on these services, isn't this something that the council locally should prioritise?
Well, we are prioritising it in as much as we're trying to protect routes that people rely on to get to work, that children rely on to get to school. We've reviewed all our routes, and where we've got routes that are not very well used, then obviously we've taken action to make savings on that. But you know, for us, it comes down to money.
Everything comes down to that.
Our bus funding has been cut by 30%, and you know, to do that and expect there to be no changes from government is totally unrealistic. I mean, we're doing our best.
So it's the government's fault, Alberta Costa. It's the government's fault.
Well, look, this is an important issue, and I wouldn't want to belittle it.
Of course not.
This affects vulnerable and infirm people,
yeah.
And I can assure you that as Member of Parliament for South Leicestershire, at the very least, I take issues affecting rural bus services very seriously indeed.
We heard in our film that cutting those services can have a knock-on effect elsewhere. For example, the charity that we were filming with had calls this week from people who hadn't actually been out of their own homes since before Christmas. So we know that when people are isolated like that, they can get depressed, and of course there's a knock-on effect then, isn't there, to the NHS?
Which is why I agree, Mary, that it is an important issue. But what I would say, and it all goes back to the point that my party has repeatedly said, and why we won the general election. We mustn't forget this. We said to the British electorate that without a long-term economic plan, we simply don't have the money for all the public services that we value.
But Alberta, what I'm trying to get at
I think it is important, Mary, with respect, that without a long-term economic plan, as a country, we can't sustain and have economically viable public services, such as important rural bus services. So yes, it is an important issue, but the money has to come from somewhere, and it can only come with a long-term economic plan.
Who's to blame for this underfunding?
Well,
Council? Government?
I think it's a question, I leave the politics to the boys, but in terms of the actual economics of this, what tends to happen is that the cost taken away from good community transport and public transport ends up going back on, as was stated by one of the people in your film, to the adult social care budget, which is the other one that takes and sucks in quite a lot of the resources.
If you look at some of the figures, I mean, taking someone by bus to the doctors, for example, by this dialer bus service, costs less than a tenner. If you're to get a doctor's home visit, that costs the NHS more than £100. Surely, you're from a business background, that doesn't make business sense, does it?
It doesn't on the face of it, and that's why I will continue to work with council colleagues to ensure that they prioritise the grants that they've got to ensure that we have an appropriate but economically viable.
But they're saying that they can't do that, Alberto. They're saying they haven't got the funds to do that. So something's got to give. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
We're using our own fleet to try and help some of our rural communities. We are financially subsidising and helping some of the community transport groups. You know, we are trying our best to ensure, and we're a big rural county, Nottinghamshire. It's rural areas that are suffering more than most.
If this was happening in the cities, in our main cities, though, Alan, I mean, you know, there'd be an absolute uproar about it, wouldn't there? But do you think it's because it's in the rural areas? People don't care as much. They're getting a rough deal,
aren't they? There might be a bit of that in it, and you know, it's strange, really. I mean, our rural areas and our market towns leave leave a lot of potential for growth, for jobs, for skills, for businesses. You can't do that if you don't have good transport links.
No.
And I'm looking forward to devolution so that we get those transport powers that will help us to take some control.
You want to leave
over
politics
bus
to the
routes.
boys, as you described it, but what should the boys be doing, and what should politicians and women in politics be doing?
Well, I do think that there are some strange arguments going on, because you're talking about saving money, but if you look at in Leicestershire, the rural rider service was cut. And then that saved a massive 80,000 or something. It wasn't a huge amount of money to cut.
Taxpayers' money.
But then in place of it, for 12 of the villages, of the 40 villages that were cut off as a result of that, they put in a sort of taxi type scheme, which you had to book days in advance, and that actually cost 28,000. So you didn't actually lose a lot, but the people who lived in those 40 villages lost everything in terms of their access to the market towns, and the knock-on effect of that obviously is that the market towns lose customers, access to jobs,
What you're saying is the people are losing out in those areas.
Well,
Claire
they're
Walters,
not
thank you so
losing
much
out.
for coming into the studio and talking us